We're talking about practice. Sono Andrea Casali, sono un preparatore atletico italiano. Negli anni scorsi ho lavorato con pallacanestro, pallavolo, rugby, calcio e ora mi occupo unicamente di pallamano negli ultimi anni.
I know it's important talking about practice.
Welcome, Ferdi. Welcome.
Welcome.
For everybody who thought we're actually doing an Italian podcast now, it's not the case. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. And it's funny to start with a joke.
As all the people know and understood probably, you are Italian.
I'm Italian.
Most of you don't know, but we know each other for quite a long time now. And you work with Blindside for like a couple of months already. We believe you're an absolute legend. Yeah, we really believe
because
that.
Because legends recognize legends.
Easy. I think for everybody not knowing you, not being aware what you do, and do not speak Italian, maybe you can just repeat what you actually do. What is your past?
Yeah, so I'm now 35 years old. I was born and grew in northern part of Italy in a nice place called Reggio Emilia. And I always did sport in my life. I'm just always been a sporter, and I played a lot of sport in my youth and started, of course, with football because that's almost mandatory in Italy. But then I rapidly changed to basketball. I have many friends trying basketball, and I love to play basketball. I started to, unfortunately, injury really soon. And then I just decided to bring my passion and my desire of sport into more knowledgeable path. So I then decided to study sports science. And I did 3 years of basic sports science school in University of Parma in Italy that has a really medical background. And then I decided to move to more really deep knowledge about sport. So I took a specialization in training of team sport and performance of team sport that gave me a broad knowledge of many sports environments. So that was really filling my curiosity and my love for the sport at the University of Bologna. It's really quite also a good university in Italy. Around those, I was working in a gym as a personal trainer and just to, start to craft the tools to be a coach, understanding movement, understanding the technique, and try to apply what I was studying. And in the meantime, working with many team sports. So I started working with football, kids in football, and then I moved to basketball, volleyball, rugby, that I also played a bit. And now in the latest year, I'm just solely focusing on handball, and I'm enjoying to study and learn about handball and apply what I'm learning about handball. So that's a little bit my brief history about sport. And I guess sport has really been a super important thing in my life. It's definitely defining my life because also I traveled a bit, and sport always been a way for me to immediately connect to other people. Yeah.
So maybe you can talk a bit more about your latest stage now. You said you're studying handball a lot.
Yeah.
In which club are you right now? What are your responsibilities?
Yeah, so I'm actually living in the Netherlands in a place called Heerhugowaard, and I worked with a local club that is called KSV, at Kruissportvereniging in Heerhugowaard. There are many clubs there around, and I'm just living really close. And actually, I tried as soon as I emigrated to the Netherlands and to try to connect with some handball clubs. And to be brutally honest, KSV is the only clubs who replied back to me and gave me the chance to step in. Also, with my knowledge of the language at the moment, it wasn't basically existing. So they gave me the chance to start to work with them and show them what I could do, speaking in English, and always been supported by someone else who helped me with translation because it was quite a tricky language to learn, especially at the beginning. And now it's more than 3 years that I'm working with this club since I moved to the Netherlands. And currently now I'm responsible of the coaches and the trainers and the technical and tactical development of our youth categories.
Since you work with a lot of sports in the past, what is different between all those sports, or do you see similarities?
Well, let's say that the way I teach and the way I'm try to teach the kids and the player to move, it follows the same process and the same principle. And of course, then based on which sport are you playing, the rules are the discriminant that dictates what kind of movement becomes specific to that sport, and so how should you learn how to perform that movement in order to be successful and achieve the technical and tactical task of the discipline. So the rules are the things that change why a handball player can, for example, run and bounce a certain number of times, or how do you grip the ball. That's also another discriminant. So the tool that you use compared to a rugby ball. You don't manage a rugby ball the same as you manage a handball. So that's just as a basic example.
Does this mean that you actually reinvented your like coaching arsenal again and again and again when
you have moving from a sport to another? It definitely brought me to study each sport and to try to understand. For example, it depends, of course, on which kind of players and ages you have to deal with. For me, just for personal interest, it's always been, first of all, the strength and conditioning aspect to bring me to get interest into the different disciplines and understand, all right, now why a rugby player need this and a handball player need that. And then you start to discover that also maybe in handball, for example, there's a high specificity for position. So anthropometry and position and technical, and it's all related to the position you evolve to. We could say that also in rugby, for example. But yeah, you have to go through and study each one of this and try to understand as much as you can, and then shape your way to train in order to create it.
But I mean, you have a good background also in strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
What does it actually look like? Do you watch a lot of film from the pros, or what are the first steps when you go into a new sports?
Now, first of all, I think it depends how do I get close to the sport. So, for example, when I get close to rugby, it was a friend of mine who said, yeah, Andrea, I see you're not doing anything. You seem quite depressed. You really need to join a team sport. It's not doing any good to you. You have to come enjoy team sport. So come enjoy rugby. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. Also, that brought me to a lot of injury, because rugby you should start it like early and really master the technique in order to play it safely. So that is the engagement. A friend of mine, a lot of good vibes, good feelings, and then what I do, I buy books. I start to buy books. I try to get all the scientific information I can from internet. So I try to find a review, report, researches about strength and conditioning. And then hopefully you get also someone who can teach you good rugby, for example, or good handball, doesn't matter the sport. And then I progress from them. And then I study technique, and I study tactic. And slowly, step by step, you integrate all the information. So,
how much do you usually have, like, or do you see a schema which is kind of like applicable to observing or like kind of like getting closer to sports again and again? You talked about how to grip a ball, for example, how to move the ball, how to move towards the ball. Have you kind of like found a schema which you can kind of like get closer to sport quicker now, since you have been involved in so many?
I think I'm quite fast in learning. Personally, I'm quite fast in learning skills, and I guess before all my injuries, of course, now are slowing me down, but I always really quick learner and really focused also on the little details and be able to learn the coordinative aspect of the movement. So while I know, at the moment that I know what I'm required to do in order to spin that ball and pass that ball, I just start to do high repetition until at the beginning, of course, it is always a raw movement. You can't expect to have, and that's actually how movement learning works. And in this case, we're applying it to a technical aspect. So passing a rugby ball, for example. So you first have to know consciently what you have to do. And that's the first step. You start to put the repetition and the work in. At the beginning is, of course, a raw movement. You can't expect to have a high quality, but you try to have to push yourself to don't do as many repetitions when you see that a certain level of quality decreases too much, and then just go for the work. And eventually, at a certain point, you learn how to pass a rugby ball properly. And then from that, then you move to the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe I would like to get closer to one topic before we jump deeper into the movement topic. You talked about the general coordinative capacity, or like just a basis of every player. It's genetically given, or like in our lifetime, we only have like certain periods where we are actually sensitive to learn more of those coordinative basics than other periods in life. How would you deal with somebody who is 18 and can't move? Is there something we
Properly.
can still fix?
Now, I have also a few examples. Now, first of all, to answer the question like broadly, it's true there are sensitive phases in our development, so this is well known. So you get the best result training a certain skill if you do it in that certain lapse of time. So, for example, between 6 and 11 for some things, and other things after 15. Each of these many sensible phases relies on a particular characteristic of our movement development, and that can be coordinative, and that can be also conditional. So, for example, you don't do a lactacid thing with kids. They don't have the enzymes, they don't have the metabolic system to do that thing. But everyone is still able to learn along the whole span of life new skills. Of course, what is changing is the quickness, how we learn things. So, of course, getting older and missing some important step along the path. It might be an obstacle, but it doesn't put a straight line that says you can't learn anything new anymore. You can.
We talked about like the different kind of sports and also the critical phases now. But how do you set the base? I mean, for everything you do in movement, there's a certain base. We as athletic trainer know, okay, you have to get into certain positions. You have to have certain abilities to fire neuromuscular.
Yep.
But how is your approach looking like when you say, okay, I want to set the base that people are still able to learn all the skills? Because sometimes you're not able to learn the skills because you're just not as far from a movement perspective. So what's your approach there?
Yeah, so what you're mentioning here is actually the problem related to an early specialization. For example, that could be an aspect of it. If you just highly specialize someone since he's a kid and then he grow up, he becomes probably a master, really skillful on performing certain movement on the specific sport or what you taught him for all these years. And then, for example, let's take a swimmer, someone who's really really good swimmer, and then you ask him to run on athletic field and you just want to close your eyes, you don't want to watch that happening in front of you. That might be an example, right? But there's plenty of those. So we know, everyone I think knows, I hope everyone knows how important it is to upbring kids from an early age with a broad spectrum of movement, and how important it is to them to experience as much as possible and learn many things. Also because you don't know whenever they will ever stop to play that sport and maybe discover something else. Like, I'm a curious person, I'm the perfect example. I just play different sport just for fun, never became a professional in anything, and enjoyed all of it, also through hard times. And so, the best thing as an educator, of a coach also, is to give the tool and the possibility to my kids to experience whatever they want in life. Now, to come into your question, that of course puts also some things that we have to work on. So we have to teach them how to run properly, at least how to jump properly, how to be safe in performing some movement, how to be able to do rotation, these things. I guess most of these things are actually included just in playful time. Just if you just let kids play in the gym and you don't give them any constraint, any rule, just look what they do. They experience, they do things, and most of the time they do all the movement by themselves. So now, having the knowledge, having studied, having some experience, you can try to put a structure to it, and then based on the age and the goals and the sport that you play, try to create a path that includes both a broad and important general learning, and then taking care of your specific sport, because that's still part of the picture.
Before we probably start with talking about kids and specific sports and specific movements, can you just give an overview? How do we learn to move?
Yes. So learning to move, it's really comparable to learning a new language. So you have to start first to get some words or sound. And when you understand the connection between this sound and what you try to communicate, something is going to happen. Say, mama, 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 something is going to happen. My mother is going to come, hopefully, and do something for me, maybe feed me or clean me up. That's, for example. But also as an adult, when you want to learn a new language, and I experienced that too, because I had to learn 3-4 different languages somehow. So now I speak basically 3 quite fluently. And so I can also give a personal perspective on this. It is true. You first have to learn basics. You have to learn the word, and then there's a second. So this is the general learning phase where there is a lot of quotients involved, also in movement. So you have to think, what are you doing in order to master and craft? What are you moving, or what are you trying to say? And then a second phase, you learn to put things together. You put words together. You understand the meaning can change a bit, can improve, and then you build up to phrases. All right, and then you bring up, you go to more evolved thoughts and more complicated communication. And for movement is the same. There is a general phase first that involves a lot of consciousness. You have to think what you're doing. I can bring also example about how I help kids about this, but first I want to finish. And then there is an intermediate phase that is where you're learning to. You don't need to think so much now. What are you doing? You understand that what the things that you do are actively changing the outcome of the movement that you're trying to perform, and you understand how changing things, controlling things is also going to have an outcome on the movement. And then there's the last part that is just the dream, when you actually don't have to think what you do, the things are just happening, and you can think about other things. So professional player has probably have to think really little on how he's passing the ball. He knows he's passing the ball, and he's thinking about other stuff. So we know about the strategy, what I have to do, what is my task here as an individual in my position, how do I collaborate? So I'm not thinking how to put my step, how to pass the ball. I'm just doing that. And that is the craftsmanship. That is the process that you learn in all this year of development.
Mm-hmm. How does it fit now what you said in the beginning? You said you watch kids move, they do all the movements, and then you talk about being conscious about what you do.
Yes.
How does this fit together? And maybe how does this, or like, is it a different understanding of consciousness, or?
So I can give you an example on how do I, let's say, assist my kids when I want to teach them a new motor skill. And it's really important when you are in the general phase, like what the kids do, they can repeat, they talk to themselves, they can repeat things to themselves in order to perform something. So I'm actually, first of all, showing what they have to do. That's definitely an important thing with kids. You don't have to talk so much. You have to say a few things. And that's another skill you have to learn. You have to just be really simple, focus on a few main points. We're talking to the very basic here, and insist on those. And what I do, I behave like a huge kid. Like I'm a huge kid in between kids. And when I show to my handball girls how to perform a three-step and jump shot, I literally say, for example, left, right, left, jump shot. I give them a repetitive process that you can use in your head, and they copy, and they do. And that, for me, it's a basic example of a sort of assistant I can give them, and then I let them do. And then I can take care to see, okay, where is the problem now? So they understand now the rhythmic. That is a huge, important part of it. They understand what I have to do. I let them experiment. I let them do some sort of mistake, and I correct what for me is like deviating too much from what I, let's say, define as acceptable.
Where is is there a difference between fun and total volume? We have talked a lot about total volume, having a huge amount of repetitions, performing one motor skill. Where do I bring the fun in? Because
Talking about kids.
Because you have all the stories. Kobe Bryant here, 10,000 shots here.
I was 6 years old, training 24 hours a day.
Andrea Casali, for example, in tennis, the father was just throwing balls all day long.
But I mean, it works. But I also have friends that just didn't want to do any sports anymore because they had these high amounts of repetitions, and they just didn't want to play anymore because it's not fun. So how do you mix that?
Absolutely important what you're saying. And in this case, you also have to be able to create a balance between the thing. I mean, of course, you can choose around, I'm going to destroy my kids of repetition. They're going to become the best player. We train, let's do just an example. We can train them 5 times a week, and we do really great training, technical skill, a lot of repetition. I think at the end of the year, I have no kids for the following season. It might be. You have to keep the fun in it. Kids learn through fun. Kids learn through entertainment. I don't think this aspect actually stops with being a kid. I think if you don't enjoy doing something, it becomes really hard to pursue. But of course, there is a huge difference between a kid and adult. I mean, kids do what they want, and adults do what they understand they have to do, what is necessary. So, at a certain point, when you evolve an athlete and you maybe become a Kobe Bryant in evolution, you understand there is an effort you have to put if you really want to get to a certain level. But that's not how the world of the kid work. Okay, so that there's a line there, and that's a different discussion probably. If we're keeping on kids, staying on your question, you have to find a balance, and they learn through being fun. So when I do, let's say I load them with volume of things, they don't perceive it if they're having fun. And if I see it's not getting fun because you have to experiment, I have to change that or remove it for now and still think about it and maybe make it more funner in the future. So the two things are both necessary and they have to coexist together.
Maybe we can just practically jump into that point. So maybe every coach who is listening can get walk away with a few things, how they can make it fun. What would be your measures, your system to kind of tweak things, tweak your training, tweak routines to make them fun?
Yeah, well, I honestly think that it's partially about what you prepare, and that's let's say that's the craft of the artist, and coaching is definitely art. That's my position at nowadays. So if we leave from aside how do you structure your training, and you know perfectly what you have to put in it, you prepare your session, you know all of that. So let's say your structure is solid. What makes the difference how you do it? And for me, and that's just personal, I don't think this is a general rule, for me, it's you have to be able to have fun too when you do it. If the kids see you are emotionally involved, and I believe a huge stupid kid basically at the training. I mean, I know I seems like a buffoon, but the kids enjoy it, and I'm teaching them stuff. Now, of course, I actually care a lot about disciplines. So through fun, I also want to start to instill in my girls the ability to a certain extent to understand when I'm talking and they have to listen. They are free to ask questions, but you want to reduce the chaos and things, and also in a fun way to start to discipline about things that I guess in the future will make a huge difference. Because if you have a player who knows what is his place and knows what to do and knows how to behave in a certain environment, is a player that's much easier to teach than another one. Now, everyone has his own personality, so I'm not trying to repress personality, but I'm just trying to put some basics also about behavior. And it's actually all about behavior, if I have to be honest. And having fun is also behavior. And yeah, that's actually my point. So I'm trying to have fun. I build up things that are fun. I make jokes with them, and I let them free to express themselves a lot.
I think what I would like to add is I already had a lot of talks with other trainers. I think the best ability a player can have is to switch between really serious and really going at it in practice, and also having the switch for fun, and then really know how and when to use it.
Agree.
So, let's say the warm-up, classic stage where everybody comes in, they just talk all the time. Sometimes it's okay and you have to let them do it, but they have to be able to switch to the real practice, because if they don't have the ability to hit the switch, the practice is gone. And I think that's a really, really clear line you have to communicate.
I agree completely. I just want to add something. And I think also you show it as a coach. I try to do the same thing. They see when Andrea is a funny end, and when Andrea now is talking a bit, let's say a little bit more seriously, Andrea is explaining, that's the moment to go and do the things. Yeah. So it's always really light difference when you work with kids. But they understand. They're super clever. Kids are super clever. And if you treat them with respect and as a clever person, they become clever persons.
Probably with kids, that's even easier, honestly. I found it always easier to have a switch in practice, honestly, because their attention span is so small, so they also forget about things that happened 10 minutes ago. True. To a certain extent. With older people, I would kind of disagree. I think that's what a lot of people dream of, to have that switch. But I think with older teams, I had the experience also with male teams, it's more about setting the attitude straight from the start, even in the beginning of the season, and then over certain periods through prep and then season and start of the season and stuff, through every single like session. That's what I found is the main difference between teaching kids, where it's more about like running a story every session, and that story can evolve actually emotions, can evolve around an actual story. Like Freddy also always laughed at me, but I think like a flamingo is a good kind of like animal to kind of like explain how to jump from a wing, for example, just with the steps and the movements and stuff. Yeah, that really is really successful with kids. With male teams, I think it's more about building a story over a longer period of time, where you say we have a certain goal, right, and then to enable that switch, it's about coming back to those things which you said, understanding why we do certain things, and then saying, okay, we want to don't get relegated, or we want to stay in the league, we want to get promoted, we want to win a championship, whatever. Those are the kind of like then attributes to kind of like turn on the switch. But I always had the feelings, to sum it up, that with all this, it's more about preparing the session in a way that the players know, okay, we are more in the fun area right now, or we're actually in preparation, because many players are not really good in that switch. Many players are not really good in kind of like, even if they're older, to kind of just say, or they wanted to switch, but they're not quite good in that.
But it's really true. But you also have to consider, now we're talking about, someone who's approaching, as a kid, who's approaching a social environment related to sport for the first time, has to grow in it. And now we're talking about an adult, or a young adult, or an older adult, a senior, doesn't matter in this case. But this is someone who did that process already. Is someone who evolved to it. So the communication with them is different. The tone that you said might be different. And then I guess there are many other variables involved. I mean, you're also a coach, you also play, then there is all the relationship coach-player, and each one is different. But then definitely agree with this.
I would also agree. And I think it's mostly in the men's team due to the different cultures they grow up in and be there, because a player that is in a like sports really professional level, they even know in the men team when to turn on and when to turn off. But you have this guy that's coming from, let's say, in the really professional sports. One comes from Austria, one comes from Germany, one comes from Italy, I don't know. And it's this whole melting pot, and people just behave different, and you have to accept that and then build around that. And then I think the way you presented it, Ben, is just the best, to set off the goal right from the start, go at it, and get them together.
I think that's the point I wanted to make as well. It's a parallel to movement. Every social interaction we have is something where we get a glance as a kid of how that situation can look like. I mean, a really drastic example would be, I don't know, somebody dies in your family. That happened when I was small, and it happens with anybody, I guess. You just learn that situation, and over time you understand what it means. And I think the same is with coaching. Like, if you tell the story really well, and you have really good coaches in the beginning of your years, where you understand, okay, how do I switch on and off? How do I make jokes? How do I interact? What is a suitable way of interacting? Because I have to tell you, everything we talked about in this podcast so far, over like 50 episodes, nothing was part of my regimen when I was a player. And that's just 15 years back. Like, all coaches behave differently. The structure, relationship, and I think you remember that as well when you actually did sports yourself. Coaches were way more brutal than nowadays. The emotional intelligence was way lower.
Zero.
It was
there was no emotional intelligence.
It was a completely different structure, how you behaved and stuff.
Yeah.
The rules in teams, I think, completely changed. So I think actually bringing that to teams, being able to tell a story, I think is like the best thing new coaches can learn nowadays, to actually bring that to further generations and implement that there.
Yeah.
I would like to switch back to movement, because
Sure.
I mean, we could talk about that topic a lot, and I think we made a lot of valid points already. You talked about the emotional intelligence of a coach. Let's put that aside. Imagine you don't have any emotional intelligence, and some coaches don't.
I didn't a few years ago, so it's really easy to get to the point.
Okay. Okay, you have to improve on that. We agreed on that.
Yeah.
What would you say structurally in a practice? What would you kind of like hand coaches to, and what can they do structurally before the practice to make sure that kids have fun in the practice? What would be your take on that?
Now, I think the start is always to have some structure, a structure that it let's say pushes at the end of it freedom, but without any structure it's just chaos. So you need some structure. So I know I want also the leader girls to learn to be, for example, on time at training. So they start to understand certain behavior, certain rituals. All right. Rituals also in old societies is what shaped then the culture of a group. So I'm going with a little bit philosophical, digression, but that's where I start with a little bit of a structure. Then they know there is a free time so they come on time, they have their things, and they're ready to start. And of course, I mean, you're not going to bother kids if they're late a little bit. You want to see the process happening. They take care of their things. They come with a little bag. They have the balls. They have the thing. They learn to put the things on time. And actually, kids generally are ready, man. They want to play. So kids generally, it's an easy job sometimes, as you said, for these things. You just have to see clearly what you want. Girls, I want you to be here ready on time. We're going to play. They're going to be ready on time. They're going to play. And the first, generally, as a good rule, I always find myself really good in leaving them some free time at the beginning. So like the younger they are, the more I leave this, and then as soon as they progress to 9, 10, 11, I prepare some sort of funny games. So the two things like evolve into each other, but that what is called the free time, the free exploration time, especially in an early age, it's absolutely important because they are crafting also other things that we might not understand. They are communicating with other kids. They are relating to other kids. They're creating things. They're catching each other, the things we were mentioning before. They're really creative. They do things. If you just throw tools in the gym, they're going to use them. You throw a mat, you throw whatever, they're going to hit themselves with light things, going to throw balls, And then of course, then I have in my head or on papers or the structure of what I'm going to do. And then we progress from that. And then if you want to learn like how the methods and the suggestion that I can give from my perspective to the coaches, like there are many ways to teach movement if we are going into that, and like literally methods about how to teach. So generally you can have, just to keep it simple, two main methods or philosophy. One is called inductive methods, where you just literally give the solution to the kids. So I'm telling you clearly what are the goal of these things that we want to perform. Or the other is the completely opposite, is the deductive method. I'm send you through difficulties, that is the exercise in this case, that have to be, of course, well proportioned to your level of skills. They don't have to be too hard. They don't have to be too easy. That's also a little bit of a game to find. And you have to find the solution yourself. Now, honestly, I don't believe you can just work with one or the other. You have to find a good combination of both. There are some times where you need to literally be a little bit behind your player and send him to the solution. Sometimes it's absolutely normal to give them the solution based on...
Do you see like an order also in terms of like sessions, or like an order where you say deductive, inductive, it should be first, like the one should be the starting point, or do you think that's open and up to the coach?
Well, I think it's also really personal. I like and I love to let my girls, and I'm sorry if I mention always girls, but I only have girls in my club now, to go and discover themselves and to go and discover the solution. I'm just how I am. I like to bring them to things, and I like to see them finding themselves. But sometimes, they can't, because they're kids. They lack the experience. They lack the knowledge too. So that's when you step in and you give, and I give them a few tips generally. I don't go straight to the solution. I don't tell her I wanted to pass to the left back because then she's going to do this and that and that. I give tips like, hey, why don't you come here, do a couple of steps behind. Can't you see better everything? Can't you look better this side and that? As like a big kid talking to another younger kid. And that's how I try to do it. For me, it's quite effective. If it's not working, I give them maybe that solution. But you can't just rely on giving them solution, because I want them to be able to think. And I mean, that's my goal. I want them to be able to read what's going on and make a decision about it. So that's why I like to find myself more in the long discovery terms of things.
You mentioned both methods. Maybe just give a really, really practical example, maybe an exercise where you use it.
Yeah, for example, of course, I use much more the inductive method. So when I give solution, when I have, in certain situations. So let's say I know I'm building up this exercise, and I'm building up, for example, we're talking about handball, a 3 against 2 on the side. So I have the center back, I have the left back, I have the left wing, and I have 2 defenders. I put a limitation on the space, so I use some plastic things or something, a puppet or whatever, to define only the left side of the field. I have a keeper, and the first time, and maybe I might add other rules, so maybe I can say also based on the age of the group, of course. But for example, I'm able to use this exercise for a whole broad of category. Then what it changes the kind of limitation I give them. Let's say I tell them they can use maximum one bounce per player. That if they are like 15, 16 is a lot. But let's just limit the example. And I see what's going on. First of all, I also maybe see where they position themselves. So I also like to see who's going to go in defense. That's something that I always love. I want to see who says, all right, I'm going. I can only appreciate that, and those are my horses. And then I see what they do. Actually, I first observe. So I know, of course, there are some girls who know they're gonna play. They like to play in the center, so they're gonna go in that position. Some girls they like to go to the back position. They go there and the wings, and the girls start to get confident to that position. I generally rotate them a lot. I teach them many positions, but in this case, I also want to see what they do. So they place in the best position, and now I can see at their best what they do. And now I see mistake. So now, what do? First, I can correct this mistake, bring in the girls where I want them to be, adding limitation or creating rules in this game. So maybe I can say, right, you are 3 against 2. There is some space somewhere. The ball starts at the center back. For example, that could be also a rule of the game. And maybe another time I start the ball to my wing, And I want my player, I know what could be a general mistake, that she doesn't attack the space and she passes the ball immediately to the left back, for example, without trying to exploit that space, without trying to put pressure on the defender, without moving her and then opening more space on the outside. Right? These are really technical things, but they don't have to know. My kids don't know. I tell them, why don't you try to score yourself? You have space there, right? Really easy tips. I don't think I'm dropping gold here. I'm just trying to explain my process. And at that point, then I see how she develops her game in the 1-against-1. If she is able to pull the defender, then if she's fast enough, she goes by themselves. Otherwise, she moves the ball. And the other one has to keep the same rule. So maybe you can use only one bounce. The second player now, hopefully, has more space. And I have now 2 players playing a 2-against-1. And I can see next step what's going on. And I see what this next player is going to do. Is she exploiting the space or she is not? Is she just taking a jump shot immediately instead of running in? And I can also eventually add another rule in the future and say you can't jump from outside the 9-meter line. Just now we really want to just attack in, But again, these are all information I'm discussing with you. This is not the kind of conversation I'm having with my kids. I give them basic ground rules, principle, let's call it how they has to be called, principle of the game. And I want them to learn those. I want them they have clarity in their heads, what they have to do as individual. And later on this, it will evolve, of course, in what we're going to do together as a simple collaboration. And then later on, this is going to evolve in a team strategy, a team plan.
Would you mainly talked about constraints you use to limit the options of the player to kind of force them in a certain kind of like behavior. Would you formulate guidelines upon that behavior? I personally think that's a fantastic way of building and periodizing also that development by saying every time you catch the ball, turn to the goal. Like that would be an easy way. Every time you don't have to dribble, don't dribble. Every time you get the ball, your first option is scoring or going between 2 people. Never run on a person. Would you kind of do that early, formulating certain like guidelines for them to say, okay, I have like, because you explained it like this, you said, is she going deep? Is she seeing other players? Is she taking her own chance? Would you formulate that as well without talking too much about like tactics or anything? But would you formulate that and kind of like repeat that?
Now, first of all, I have to suggest to anyone that there is a beautiful book that was written by a scientist called Estriga. She's Portuguese, in collaboration with the Portuguese Handball Federation and the European Handball Federation, and it's called Learn Handball. I guess. I hope I didn't say it wrong. But it's a book who explains actually this thing. So how to teach, and it's for handball. I think it's a great thing. I never imagined someone to write a book like this, just specifically about handball. And it's a book meant for coaches to learn how to teach handball. And it's a great book. So I would suggest to everyone, it's in English It's full of pictures. It's seriously, I find it just unbelievably good. It's written really good. So, and to answer your questions, yeah, you have to create you have to teach the principle. Yeah, you have now. You can have your personal philosophy, but there are the principle of the game. All right, these are the things we have to teach, and that's just to mention a few really easily. The girls the players have to learn to exploit the space forward. Someone is free and is in a better position than me because we want to put the ball in the goal on the other side. We want to progress forward, so we want to exploit that space. Now there might be an easy opportunity when I can pass the ball to someone in better position than me, and now she has the ball and she has the opportunity to finish our goal and try to score. Otherwise, in more confused situation, in situation that are not really clear, now you're really right. Now I have to see if I can exploit the space myself. Maybe I can use a bounce because I'm forced to. It might be a good solution, and then I move the play, and then I can open a situation for someone else. So I really believe definitely we have to teach the principle of the game, and we can use constraint, or we can use the deductive methods, we can use the inductive methods, we can use our own creativity. We have to use all of these tools.
Yeah, I would just like to add, I'm completely agreeing.
Sure.
What I think and what I meant is, I personally believe it's super important to create a language which is understood to continuously just improve certain behavior. If we talk about exploiting space or looking for an option, we have to kind of like create a space which we can use in like the next week, the next 6 months, the next year, or the next 3 years, to kind of like remind certain players about certain situations. Because I mean handball alone, or basketball or football, there are so many of them. Like,
true,
like
it doesn't matter the sport, it's the principle, it's the method, the principle. Yeah,
but making sure that those principles are understood by 1 or 2 words. I see Fadi doing that a lot, also in coaching and when it comes to strength and conditioning, to kind of like remind them of pictures, of situations, of behaviors, to kind of make sure that they're kind of able to switch, remind them back, and then kind of reintegrate that principle into their game. And I mean, that happens with professionals, with amateurs,
I
with
do
kids.
it with kids too. That's absolutely that's a pillar. I mean, the motor learning and the general or specific learning of the sport, in this case we are going through the specific learning of the sport, has to go through practical but also of course theoretical principle. Now we don't put the kids to study on book, but through repetition of concept, really basic word, I know they are going to learn also this language of that sport. And that allows me in the future, when I talk about a vertical attack, horizontal attack, this kind of, and I mention these words, they heard these things for years. Now you start really easy, the same as movement, and then you progress to more complicated technical and tactical words and concepts. But that's also a process. It's like learning, learning process.
When it comes to movement and teaching movement, what would be a few principles you would give or hand over to coaches when they're listening to that podcast?
Well, that's the really big question. So first of all, you have to know that everything you teach and everything your player, your athlete is performing, of course, has a repercussion, or we can call it adaptation. So everything you do has positive and negative adaptation. So for example, one of them, we talk about handball again, or other sports like volleyball, where you have a lot of this closing chain movement in the anterior part of your body. You can develop a sort of rigidity in one or both shoulders, and a rigidity in one side that can rotate stronger than the other, and a hypermobility in another area, or a hypomobility, so restriction in the movement in other areas. So this thing has to be keeping in account. Of course, until a certain age, and you're working with, then there are also gender differences, but in kids they still have a decent mobility for a long part of their youth development. And then of course when you go through puberty, you go after puberty, hormones get released, and that change also the structure, the tissue structure of your body. So maybe mobility becomes a factor that you have now to consider seriously. But I guess that through coordination exercise you can keep also a really good mobility, because you can create games and stuff and things where the kids have to swing legs, and they've learned, or maybe just teach them, that's what I'm trying to do lately, to teach them a sort of funny routine in the warm-up. So I know they don't need that mobility today, but we are also performing movement basically mostly on one side all the time. So I want them to learn maybe in the future that they don't think about it. Oh yeah, let me do my warm-up routine, and they do these things, you know. So yeah, it's also a lot of experiment too on the same time. But yeah, like you, that's to answer the question is also difficult. There are many things to keep in accountant, to keep in your mind. But yeah, basically you have to study a bit also and know what to do.
It's okay. I will make it more difficult.
All right, thank you.
If you have one sentence, just one sentence, which you want to give to other coaches, because I also need a quote for Instagram again. If you have just one sentence you can say to other coaches when it comes to movement and learning movement, what would you tell them?
9, 8.
Well, that's a really difficult question. I mean, you have to sum up everything I know in one phrase. I don't know.
Maybe it can just be one method or one social interaction, something that's really important for you.
Well, man, at this point, considering the new things I'm studying too, honestly, everything relies about emotion and honesty. If I need a line that is not really related to this, I will never forget in the opening page of my biochemistry book at the university, the first line that there's nothing related to biochemistry that's hit me really hard was "What doesn't move doesn't live," and that's a great line. That has a value from universal value from a cell. If a cell doesn't move, dies, doesn't interact with the environment, to the universe. Thing that doesn't move become stuck or black hole or and that actually includes everything. You as a coach too, you have to move, not just you have to change. You have to move, and changing is related to movement, and movement is related to changing. And what you do, you're just helping these kids the way through changing and evolving. So you have to be part of it. You don't stay on the side. Don't try to look. I'm talking about kids now, right? As always, but. Don't stay on the side thinking to be the most professional guy ever. I mean, if you know your thing, you know what you have to do. Also, some simple guidelines. Just jump in it. Have fun with the kids. Move with them, and eventually teach them handball. Hopefully, but let's be honest. Also, if you do, I mean, in the development of a great athlete, there are many things to come into account. And the biggest factor that destroys, let's say, the talent of the potential. Success of an athlete is the family psychological support. That's the big one. So that makes you immediately understand how important is the social role of the coach, of the educator when you go to training. If you're dealing with kids, you automatically put on a pedestal where they see you as a parent figure at the moment. So you don't need to fight for your authority. All right? That's not something in the game. If you have fun, if you show them you're open, honest, and you care about them, kids are going to follow you, and you're going to be able to teach them whatever you want. That's my personal view. And then later on, other things come into play. Later on, you can express your professionalism, be prepared, blah, 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 whatever. It's really important with more adults and things. But with kids, if we are talking with people who deal with kids, just move with them, get into it, and have fun. And that's seriously probably the key for movement learning, honestly.
Last question in the end of every podcast. What is your biggest dream in sports?
Oh man, mine personal biggest dream in sport. I wish I could work in an environment where I'm surrounded by people who share with this passion that I have, and that although I love to have different people around, but I would like to be in an environment where I can perceive the energy and the wave and the pursue, and that we are going to that point, in that direction, and we are all working for a common big good. That's really with me, my desire.
All right, Andrea, thank you very much.
I think that's a good statement for the end. Andrea, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for visiting us in Berlin.
Oh, thank you to you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it is a lot of fun.
As always, you can in Spotify now rate the podcast with 5 stars. Everything else is not available.
Absolutely unacceptable.
You can subscribe to the podcast and share it. That would be awesome. And until next time.
Well, don't forget, Freddy, we're also on YouTube, so you can also share.
You can also
subscribe
go on YouTube
and comment on YouTube. If people want to reach you, Andrea, how can people reach you?
Yeah, well, you can come to the Netherlands in Heerhugowaard, but apart of that, you can just if you have any question of someone who just want to have a chat to talk about how to training kids, I hope there are people out there, and you can find me. Just text me on my Instagram. It is Andrea the Handball Movement, and I answer to anyone who's interested to talk about these things.
Perfect.
Fantastic, Andrea. We will link everything in the show notes. Have a fantastic day.
Well,
Out there to all the listeners as well. Ready?
Until next time.
Until next time.
arrivederci.